Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Cherwell Technical Deep Dive session. And today's topic is about approvals before version 10.2. So my name is Tabitha Ishman, and I'm the Marketing Manager of Excalibur Data Systems. And I just wanted to welcome all of you to the webinar today, and then talk about a few logistics before we go ahead and get started. The lines are muted and the webinar is being recorded. So the recording will be sent via email to all participants tomorrow, and then you can also find it on the YouTube channel tomorrow as well. We'll answer questions at the end in a Q&A session, but you can ask questions at any time during the presentation just by typing them into the question window. So a little bit about Excalibur. We are a leading edge consulting firm guiding organizations through their digital transformation journey. And I don't want to take up any more of your time today, so I'd like to introduce one of our presenters and senior solution architects, Scott Valor.
Good afternoon, guys. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully you'll have an awesome day. We're gonna walk you through some really cool stuff and take some questions at the end, like Tabitha said. So I'm Scott Valor. I'm a senior solutions architect and consultant with Excalibur Data Systems. And today I am joined by Jonathan Burdick and Mike Estep, which are also senior solution architects and consultants. And we have all been customers and Cherwell admins before we became consultants, and we've been doing this a very, very long time. We all started out when Cherwell was in its single digits quite a while ago. All right, so today's journey is pretty much going to be a deep dive on approvals. We're going to go from A to Z, kind of cover everything approvals have pre 10.2. This is February 9th, 2021. 10.2 has not been released yet. It is on the horizon. It's very close, and it will change the way that approvals function in a fundamental way. So right now we're setting the stage for how approvals exist right now to give a baseline and also answer a lot of questions for what you're dealing with today. We're going to cover these bullet items. Big picture where we're going. All right, so from here on out, everything that we're going to do is going to be live. We're going to demo everything in the tool. And I am right now in the administrative tool, and we're going to go ahead and talk through right from the beginning what the architecture around approvals are and then kind of how you set them up. So one of the key pieces with approvals is that today the approval engine is designed where the threshold is approvals. And what that means is that when you have a choice between approvals, deny, and abstain, it will count everything necessary to cross the threshold for an approval. And so the moment that you get enough denials and or abstain votes that it's not possible to cross the threshold for approval, then you've denied it. And that is how the Cherwell approval engine works. So it's that approval threshold, and that's critical that you understand that. I had a conversation with that yesterday about a fellow who thought that the abstain votes didn't count for anything, but they prevent you from potentially receiving enough votes to cross the approval threshold line. Okay, so when you get in the admin tool, the first question you have is, well, does the object already have approvals on it that I'm looking at, or how do I get them turned on? Right now I'm looking at the change model, and by the way, I'm in 10.1.2, and on the change model, it doesn't have approvals right now. So when I look at it over here on the right, I can click Add Approval Support, and that will go ahead and enable approvals. We're going to do the rest of this talk in Change Request, which already has approvals set up, and so you'll notice it now says Edit Approvals as opposed to Add them. When we go into editing the approvals, we're going to walk through all the dialogues here and kind of explain everything and answer some of the burning questions that you have. So the first thing we have here on the left was we've got approvals. We have kind of some advanced sections. Here in the middle, we have different types of approvals that are available, and we've got options to edit them, copy them, delete them, kind of sort their order. And then we have the ability to notify by email. And I'm kind of going around the dialog box before we dive into the deep stuff. So approvals can send out emails, and there's two different ways that those approval emails can go out. One is by clicking this and setting up your approval email. I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. The other is to use the automation engine and have it send approval emails as the approvals are generated. So if you use the approval engine, you can be much more discreet in how and when you trigger those emails. If you use this tool, it's going to generate an approval email every time an approval is created. You don't have any other controls. When we look here at the middle with the different types of approvals that we have, so we can stack up, like here for change, we've got emergency type approvals, we've got normal change approvals, and I can change their order. And this is just like a case statement. So Cherwell is going to walk down this stack of approvals, and it's going to go from the top down. And the first one that hits, that meets your criteria and triggers, that's it, it's going to stop. And so as you stack these up, think about the order, if it matters, as a first level approval, second level approval. Make sure that you're triggering in the way that you want. So let's go ahead and edit the normal change. And I am going to hand it over to Jonathan, who's going to walk us through the trigger conditions and some of the other settings here.
Thanks, Scott. So if you recall from the previous screen, we actually had two different approval conditions there, for the lack of a better term. So we can actually have multiple trigger conditions that are stacked upon one another. So when we actually move then into configuring the trigger condition, if you've done any work in the search manager, or you're familiar maybe with building the various clauses and using some of those clause types, then the interface here for the trigger condition should be familiar to you. So we can set up things that actually are pretty simple. So perhaps we might want to even just use a single logical expression, which even one you see on the screen there, where the change type equals normal. Or we might want to compound that. So we've got two different logical expressions where we have a change type that's normal, and then we're waiting for the status to turn to an approval state. So this can be as simple as you need, and in some cases it really doesn't need to be even bigger than what we have here on the screen. Other times though, you're going to find that just based on your own process work, that you might actually have to have something that's a little bit more sophisticated, and hopefully it's it's just appropriately sophisticated, just depending on the circumstances there. Now, oftentimes, and we have found this to be true in multiple versions, that if you have the sort of the query builder there, so to speak, expanded, oftentimes it moves the entire dialog box content down, but it doesn't actually change the frame of the dialog box. So this is caught even us off guard periodically, and so that's the settings at the bottom concerning when the condition is not true, what should the approval piece do with the particular records in the block. Sometimes that can just get pushed down below the dialog box frame. So just be aware of that, and make sure that if you expand the window to have a larger space to work with the trigger conditions, that you just create, or you just drag the box out so that you can see the entire space. So we have there at the bottom, once we have defined our condition, what's going to actually set this particular approval cycle off, we have the option to set the behavior concerning what we do with the approval records. You can see Scott has gone ahead and selected leave approvals, and this is probably the typical way that we would do this, because we would set up in addition to the relationship that is used predominantly or used exclusively for a particular object to hold the current approvals, we would also build in tandem an approval history relationship, and we'll be able to move the approvals in and out of these relationships just by changing some values. So oftentimes we actually want to leave the approval records so that we can do something with them ourselves rather than having Cherwell try to do something with them from its standpoint. So if we move then down to the second selection on the left-hand side, we have the approvers. So once the trigger condition has been initiated or invoked, then we can establish all of the variations concerning who should be a recipient of a particular approval record. Now, we can do a lot of different things in this space. We can, as you'll see in a little bit, we can give it to teams, we can give it to individuals, we can do a combination of those things. Just as a reminder, because this is 10.2, we are working from a technician perspective, not a customer perspective. And we're still working from the point of view of the approvals, not whether or not something has been denied in a particular way. So at the top, we have kind of the initial set of criteria that we want to be able to set for this particular approval space. So we can choose whether we would like all of the approvers to respond, or whether we want a particular percentage of users, or whether, if we say perhaps generate maybe 3 or 4 separate approval records, maybe we only need one person out of that particular cycle to respond affirmatively before the system says, aha, this has been approved, and I can move on to my actions. Now you'll see when we hit the percentage button there, we do have the default is 50%. As Scott said before, because we're working only from an approval perspective and not the denial point of view, we do have to make sure that we understand that while perhaps in a situation where we might have 4 approval records, as an example, and we only need 50% of those records to be approved in order for this particular cycle to move on to its various actions, we would have to actually exceed that percentage from a denial standpoint in order to actually run the denial content. So Scott's just bumped that up a little bit there. So we would have to, in the case of perhaps 4 different approval records, we'd have to have 3 of them that were denied in order to trigger the denial actions versus triggering some sort of approval action. Now, it should be said in this space that the kind of typical way that Cherwell is tracking this is through what's called an approval block, and you can sort of just think of that as under the hood, there's a unique identifier that's kind of keeping all of these various approvals together, or it's keeping them separate, that kind of thing. So when we are looking at the final selection there in the drop-down box on the right, we've got a couple of selections, whether we count all approvals, whether we count just this particular block, or whether we count block and perhaps manual or ad hoc approvals. So if we don't have perhaps a history relationship and we're using count all approvers there, it's just going to keep tallying up the approvers in that in that sort of core approval relationship. Versus if we're using just the count block only, it's just considering this particular instance of identified approvals with the consistent block identifier. And if we do need to specify a situation where we're going to send out a couple of approvals that are always standardized, they go to the same people, but we're going to have an opportunity as well for someone to create an ad hoc approval or a manual approval, we'll want to make sure that we have that count block and manual set so that it considers the approvals that were created manually, which are theoretically outside of the block, would be counted kind of as the whole. So I want to turn it over to my colleague Mike, who's going to go over some of the ways that we can designate the different approvers within this section of the configuration. Mike?
Thank you, Jonathan. So before we get through, we're going to add some users because we need approvals at this point. How am I going to add some approvals? Who am I going to add? How am I going to add them? What am I going to add them for, etc. But before we click on any of these, if you'll notice, there's an approval text that we have as a default. And we set this approval text as kind of, if I don't set anything at any of the other levels, this is going to override my, this is going to just give me something to put in the text there. We also have a deadline down there as well that kind of set as a global, unless one of my other levels override it as well, which we will see it here in just a moment. And our deadline can be in hours, days, or even months. I don't know that I would ever want our approval go that long, but okay, it's in there. So let's go ahead and click on the add button, and we're going to add a user. So our first option is a singular user to be able to add on here. If I wanted to add Andrew, for instance, and Andrew is going to always be at this level and he's always going to be one of my approvers, I can go ahead and add him there. And then we have some custom approval text, and you'll notice that in there we already have the default approval text. So if I wanted to overwrite at this particular level what my custom text would be, I could then back this out or add to it or anything that I wanted to do as well. And that would override the default part of it. You're going to see this repeated over and over, so I'm not going to go through once we go to the next levels of these other things in here, other than what's specific to those different levels of approvers. So the append change request description is exactly what it means. Once I get to the approval, there's going to be a details box that's going to say, please review this and notify the manager. And it's going to append the change request description so that when we send out emails, etc., or somebody comes and looks at this approval, maybe they don't see the change request at all, they're going to at least have the description from change request to be able to see within this approval as well. Unchecking it will do exactly that. It will not put the change request description in there, just what I'm putting into my approval text. Again, we have a deadline, and this is the custom deadline per this level of approval. So if Andrew, we only want to give him 1 day, or 6 days rather than the month or the hours, then we could give him only that amount for that particular level that he has to respond back to, and not what we set for a default. So clicking on our add, our next one we're going to talk about is a team, and it's exactly as it sounds. So what team do I want to add in here for approvals? So, and from a team aspect, this is the same as when you're setting up emails. If I use team : and put a team out there, it's going to email, or in this instance, it's going to create an approval for each team member that's in this team that we have here. So this may be first level based upon whatever we're doing. Maybe this is a service request, etc. I can then do my custom approval text, my change description, custom deadline, and then I have something else down here at the bottom. Because Andrew was a single person, I don't really have to say a percentage of how many is going to be at that level. I just know it's going to be Andrew. But at this level, I have more members in my team, hopefully. Otherwise, I'm a team of one, and then it really doesn't make any sense. But I can kind of override a little bit at the top as well from this aspect of how many team members do I have to have in order for this approval to move forward. So again, just like we have at the top, all team members, percentage of team members, specific number of team members that have to meet the approval before it can move forward. And the same concept that Jonathan was just talking about. So we'll add another one to this. And this next one we're going to do is through an expression. And we already have one that's kind of in here as well that we can kind of take a look at. But it's what do I have from a change request, or what from my expressions down here, or a stored value, or anything that I could use to find team members or approvers that are not in any of the other levels. And this is kind of at the way that you could do customer approvals pre-10.2, because you could use this expression that could pull out any of the customers that might be in a particular location, etc. So one of the reasons that we might want to do that. You'll notice we do have a different button down here at the bottom. So once I get a relationship in there, rather than having to remove it, maybe I just want to change it, I can click on configure, and it allows me to change it to something else. And I could change it to a field, metric, etc., any of the things that we would normally have at our disposal as far as Cherwell is concerned. So the last level we have is add users from a relationship. And this does almost like we did with the expression, where we could do anything from an expression, a field, even within the relationships. If you really kind of look at it from the fields in there, this is actually using the relationship itself to be able to pull all of those things in there. And I could limit my records down. Maybe this particular one is only for cab members, or this particular one might be only for folks of a particular a site. They might be on multiple teams, which is why I don't want to use that team, because I only want the members that are on that team from a site. And then where is the ID that I'm going to pick it up from? Which is usually in the user info. It's our rec ID. And again, you'll see that we have that configured. So just in case, that wasn't the right relationship and I already hit OK, I don't have to go back and delete it, or I want to change something on limit records, then I could just do it really quick and easy from a configuration standpoint from that button down there at the bottom. And I don't have to start all the way over. Because once I remove this, I would have to redo my custom tags, I'd have to redo my custom deadlines, etc. So that gives you a quick and easy way of being able to update stuff without having to blow the entire level away. And with that, we're going to be going into our next section here of actions, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Mike. So we've covered some good ground here. We've talked about how do we invoke this particular approval block. Who are we going to send it to for a decision? And then finally here, we want to once the decision has been made, then we want to be able to configure, well, what do we do with that? And so on the actions section of the approval block configuration, we've got 3 different sections of what the system can do. We've got the what do we do when the block is approved? What do we do if the block is denied? And then one finally at the bottom, what do we do if time runs out? We sent a deadline, approver didn't respond in time. What kind of action do we want to take? With each one of these, we have the ability to do 3 separate actual actions of sorts. We can actually set a field to a particular value. So, Scott's got the approval lock logical field there set, and he wants to change that to false or true. We can also put this particular record on a queue, which we don't really do a whole lot of, but you could put that into a particular queue that you have already established. Or you can run a one-step. And I would say this one's probably, by and large, this one's the most popular because it gives us the most flexibility in the system. So as you're probably aware, with a one-step, we can do all sorts of work within that context. And so we have a lot of different options. We could send emails, we could create other records, we could advance the status maybe of a change automatically. The other reason that that a lot of us use the one step almost exclusively is that I think you'll find in a couple of different versions, I don't know exactly where it is, but we've often found that let's say that you want to set a field, or you only had one field that you wanted to set, and you used this particular selection here called set a field. We've found that that doesn't actually always work. So how we would typically approach this would be to simply remove that selection from there altogether, and instead embed that particular action amongst anything else that we would like to do within the context of the one step. And then we can do all of the things that we want to do, and including setting the status, which oftentimes we do want to perform when we're moving out of a particular approval block. Now, when we talked about when we were looking at the beginning, even before we got into the depth of the approval block, we were looking at actually the multiple triggers that we can set up. So Scott was explaining about how that works from the top down, and we can set particular parameters for each. The checkbox for executing the action completes the approval process is the kind of the final step in Cherwell's ability to either call the approval cycle totally done and it stops the process, or it leaves it open and ready for an additional or subsequent approval cycle. So in the case of where we have, say, multiple approval conditions, where perhaps we have stage one is that we need to get approval from person A or group A, and then step B, where we need to get approval, say, in change, maybe from our change advisory board. We would set that up in such a way that the approval process would only be checked on the final approval stage. So for that first approval stage in that multi-tiered path, that checkbox would be left unchecked. Now, is there a reason to leave that unchecked even if you just had a single approval cycle or block to consider? And the answer is yes. And the reason is because if for some reason that at a subsequent part of your process that the change record needs to maybe be reworked, or some other action needs to occur where we would still want to invoke an additional approval block, or we want to repeat the approval blocks, we need to make sure that the approval engine is still actually running. So in that case, we would have a situation where we really kind of have a perpetual approval block that's never really told to stop, only because we want to make sure that if for whatever reason we have to invoke some other approval piece, that we still have that available to us. So I think Scott was going to actually illustrate some of this, how the record, how the approval piece works, especially when we're taking into an account the standard defining relationship that holds the approvals, but then also having a subsequent relationship set up that holds the approval history record. So Scott, I will let you not only drive here, I think, if you're going to do that, but you can provide some commentary if you'd like.
Okay, so Jonathan was talking about that checkbox that ends the approval cycle and stops approvals dead in their tracks, and they don't run anymore. Once it hits that, it's just done. You can't do a second approval, you can't do chains, and you can't go and rework a change and do the approvals again. And I was thinking that I would show you how you know if the approvals are even running. So I'm in the rich client now on tools here. And when I go look at the current record automation, this is a change that I made up earlier today, and it's at the approval stage. I have approvals that are currently waiting. And here within showing the business processes that are running, you can see that the approval process is running and when it kicked off. So that's when I started my approvals. This approval set, the checkbox is cleared. So once it gets approved or denied, the approval engine will continue to run and watch for new approvals to hit it in case I send it back to rework it and get reapproved again. That's okay. When this change request gets closed, that approval process will end. So it's not just going to run forever. So that's one way you can see if it's running. You can also see if it failed and come check here and see kind of what went wrong while you're troubleshooting some stuff you're building out. One thing that I forgot to mention early on when we got started, and I apologize for that, is I forgot to set up the approval sections here before Mike talked about them. And I wanted to point out that when we're looking at each entry here within the approvers, that's considered a single approver with respect to the top up here when you're saying I need one approver, I need 50% of the approvers or whatever. And what the consequence of that is that if I have a team, at the bottom here, I set the threshold for the team to cast one vote as either approve, deny, or abstain. So the result is that when the team crosses its threshold, it then casts one vote. The same thing with any of these relationships or anything else, they cast one vote per line that's here. And so I want to make sure you understood that. I forgot to mention that. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to hand this over to Mike because we've pretty much talked about all of this. And he's going to talk us through some of the advanced settings around the approvals.
Awesome.
Yours,
Thanks, Scott. So real quickly, we've got this tab over here on the outside for the advanced settings. And some of these are pretty much, what they mean is what they say. But we'll go through the first one. So relationship holding approvals. Out of the box, there's normally a change owns approvals. And if we dropped it down, it's really any relationship that I've set up that is linked to approvals. So this particular one in the first place is the change request own approvals, which when we go back to the tab, Scott will be able to show you that that's the current approvals. And then there was one in there for approval history.
Sorry.
So once it gets moved over to approval history, then that's its own separate tab. But it's showing up here because it's linked, change request is linked to an approvals for two different relationships. So we need to first get the one that is holding our approvals, which is our owns or our current approvals. And then for the field holding the description is exactly what it is. What is the description that I'm going to pull over from my business object? So this is from a change request or service request or wherever I'm getting, doing approvals from. What is it that's holding this description? So when I click that checkbox that we saw back there when we were adding approvals, that I want to use the change request description, this is the field that's pulling it from. So if I have it in summary or I have it in some other configured field that I might have, done something out of the box, I'll want to change this to know that I'm getting the right description pulled over. Change holding the ID of the selected approval. And again, that's your block ID that you've heard talk through this entire thing. Where's the block ID that I'm looking for all these approvals? And then the last one is a very important one. So when do I want to generate these approvals? So we've talked trigger conditions. And trigger conditions, we can have this and out of the box, we normally do this. Do I want to do it right when those trigger conditions are done and generate those approvals? Or do I want to do it after the record is saved? Do I want to leave a little bit of time so that I'm not triggering something that maybe I didn't want to quite trigger? So you can have that option to be able to set it as soon as the conditions come true, go ahead and do those approvals, or wait till I save the record and then trigger the approvals to be created. And that's the end of what I have to talk with, and I'm going to roll it back over to Scott, who's going to wrap us up with a few extra topics, and then we'll see if we have any time for Q&A.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jonathan. And like Mike said, this one's super important, this record save, because if you have a one-step that's chaining a whole bunch of triggers that might fire one you don't expect, you may want to choose that. All right, we're going to go just kind of look at the approvals in action, just very, very casually, because most of you have already seen approvals, but we've talked about the approval history. There's a couple different ways you can do approvals, and so I'm just going to kind of cover very quickly what some of that looks like. This is the change request that we looked at earlier, and Mike had said that when you have the change request set up, it says what relationship are the current approvals linked into. And so when it's looking at the block and it's saying, well, where are all the approvals that are part of this block? It's looking at that relationship, which on change request is this current approvals tab. And that's our active approvals. And each one of these will have a block ID on them. And then I'm just going to pull one of these up. I played with this a little earlier and I'd set some custom approval text. And so this part here that says, this is my custom approval text, that's that custom block. And then I had the checkbox set, which said, bring over the change description. And so this is what it looks like when it puts your text and then appends that change description over. And you'll see here's my description. We update the SQL Server. Now, I'm going to go ahead and flip over to another change request that I did earlier that's already been approved. And I'll show the current approval tab has no approvals on it. In change request out of the box, they have an approval history relationship as a secondary relationship. And in the one steps that are doing the approval, Jonathan showed that section where you could run a one step if it's approved or denied. Well, out of the box, they're running a one step that says when it gets approved or denied, and it's finished, the approval stage, go ahead and move all of those approvals over to the approval history and remove them from the primary approval relationship. So they're no longer being counted. So this is some that have been moved over. And one of the things you'll notice is I have two here that say they're waiting, and that's because I had a threshold of 50%. So as soon as half of the people approved it, then I was guaranteed to be approved. And so it just automatically approved it. And these last two, it kept them in their current state. So one of the things I always suggest is that when you're updating that one step to move to approval, go ahead and change that status to something that lets you know that they didn't vote. So I usually will add in another type of custom status that basically says it was not voted or it's a historical entry, something like that, that just lets me know that this wasn't discarded, they didn't get a chance to vote, they just hadn't voted and it was approved for whatever reason. It'll make your history make a lot more sense when you're just doing searches around approvals. All right, so if I go back to this previous record, I'm going to show you what it looks like to approve it. There's two different ways to approve it. One is through the rich client itself here on our approvals. And I can come in and I can put down here my notes, this is good to go, and I can approve it, or I could deny it or abstain here at the bottom. And that's going to cast one vote. We'll just switch our view back. So that's Gina's is approved. It also sends out email. So as long as my email hasn't timed out, yes, I want to stay connected. Look at the timing on that. All right, let's see which one of these it is. Let's see. 049. See if I get the right one. Okay, so the email that goes out, we'll make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to read. Looks like this, and this is fully customizable just like everything else. We have, what the change request is, standard details. We have a couple links here. I can approve, deny, or abstain, and you can choose whether or not you want to use abstain. Standard links down here at the bottom, details. But I wanted to show you what these look like, because when you click one of these to approve, it's going to go ahead and generate an email back to Cherwell, and the current style is that we have a subject that is a very rigorous subject that has very specific text in it. In this case, it's change request approved, and it has the number of the actual approval that I'm approving. And down here, we tell them that they shouldn't alter the subject line because we're doing text filtering on that subject line in order to know what to do with it and how to associate it. And then they can come down here and they can type, whatever. And when they send that back, it's going to be picked up by the email monitor and processed. And where that is, just to give you all the details here, is within email and event monitoring. When we go into the email monitor, we're going to have a custom rule on that monitor that tells it what to look for and watch for those approvals as they come in. And so here within our demo monitor, I'm going to have a series of individual rules. And in this case, out of the box, I have approved, denied, and abstained. And they all follow the same format. So we'll just look at approved. And the idea here with the approved is, standard stuff, what object. You'll notice that when we go to ID the record, we're going to look in the subject for the number of the approval. So this is the public ID on the approval that we're looking for. So it was approval 11,100 for the one that I approved. And then the trick here, though, is the conditions. And the condition says, we don't care about it being found. Doesn't really matter at this point. What we care about, because we didn't have a specific thing, is we're looking for a subject in that email. So we don't have like a necessarily a conversation ID that we match. So we have to say, okay, well, what's in the email that lets us know how to associate it for the rule? So in this case, we're going to say that the subject contains this specific text. So if they altered that or forwarded it and then sent it, it wouldn't work necessarily. So it must contain this, and then we get to do our approval. And they're just going in, and in this case, all it's doing is flipping it over to approved. It's setting the status, and then we're letting the approval engine then take care of the rest. As opposed to say maybe we've done something outside the approval engine and had our custom automation processes that flop all of that. But that's kind of approvals end to end. That's where all the bodies are buried and all the pieces flow. And the things that catch most people up on the approvals very straightforward is the approval blocks and how they are like by the team versus, let's go into here to the approvals real quick, versus an individual approver. So when you come in here and you have a team, they forget that the one line gets one vote. When you're looking up here, sometimes you think, well, I've got 10 people in the team. I've got to have, 7 of those people have to vote. So just remember that so you don't get tripped up there. And the fact that each of these is, is a block. So, excuse me, went to the wrong place. The other place that you'll get messed up, which Jonathan had pointed out, is here on the actions, the checkbox as to whether or not you're going to end the approval process. Very consistently, those are 2 things you want to check when your approval process just stops running or you're not getting the votes that you need and it's not moving forward. Let me check my notes, see if there's anything else. Is there anything else, guys, that you guys want to mention that people tend to get stuck with, or you notice that are issues that maybe they want to watch out for? Let's see.
The only thing to mention again, so and there was somebody that put one in the question and answers, and I think I answered it, but just to mention to make sure everybody has seen it as well, is that currently 10.1.2 and back is set up from a user perspective. So users are the approvers, your technicians are the approvers, etc. 10.2 coming out is supposed to address that gap and allow you to have customer approvers. Does that mean that we can't do it in 10.1.2 and back? No, we've set that up over and over, and these guys will probably tell you the same thing, that there's been many customers in the past that I need to have my manager approve it, but these actions are not set up that way. There's ways that we can configure it currently to be able to do the customer's approval as well.
Yeah, most definitely. And remember that the approval engine runs on the automation engine. So if your automation engine is, your automation processes hang or aren't running, approvals aren't going to fire or process. Are there any other questions in the chat? And if not, we could unmute everybody and we could open the forum to general questions if you like.
There's two that came in, Scott.
Okay.
I can read them out loud unless if one of you wanted to pull them.
Yeah, so the question I've got is, does it take system resources if you leave the changes in a perpetual running block? Is there a way to stop all of them on closed changes? So simply a two-part question. So number one, does it take a lot of resources for running the process? So you're talking the AP, is running in the background. You want to, Jonathan, Scott, you want to try that one?
You're not going to notice a significant amount of effort on the automation process when it is watching changes that are waiting for additional approvals. Does it take resources? Yes. Is it significant? You're never going to notice it. As an example, as a customer, we were racking up 1.5 to 2 million tickets a year. We had thousands of change requests every year. Running on a single server for web and the application on-prem, you would never, ever notice the resources that takes up. It's not really going to be an issue. If you're that tight, you have some other issues that are going to bite you first. And then when a change request gets closed, that process will stop. It's not going to run in forever.
Yeah, I've never seen a performance hit from just leaving it running.
All right, and then we have another one. If you need every member of a team to approve, would you list each of them individually as users instead of setting up the team?
Style question, really. I wouldn't set individual users because I hate having to maintain it. So I would just come in here and I just add a team in and just go ahead and on the team, just come down here at the bottom and set that all the members in the team have to do it. And you could either just say all approvers up here, because there's only one approver at this point. You can still do a threshold, which as soon as one votes, you're good to go, or a specific number. You can find whatever you want up here, but having to maintain these members sucks if you want to list everybody and your team membership changes, or you change and somebody else takes over and they don't understand that why are the changes not going, because everybody in that team's getting it. So try to make your maintenance as easy as possible.
Yeah, and that's the one thing to probably look out for on the configuration there is when you have a team in there that you've got that whole extra set of radio buttons down there at the bottom specifically for that purpose of designating, how many people within that team need to take some sort of action.
All right, have a few to unmute our guests, and then if anybody else has any other questions, please go ahead and ask away. We'll give it a couple minutes, and if not, then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so Scott, I'll have you jump back to the PowerPoint just so you can point out about the quest for collaboration.
Yes, thank you. All right, so while the questions are coming up, we have a quest for collaboration every Wednesday, 3 o'clock Eastern. You can register for that, and pretty much what that's going to do is get that onto your calendar so that you can join us when it's convenient for you. We have a lot of customers show up for that, and it's a way to share ideas, ask questions, and collaborate with other administrators and with some of our consultants, and just kind of brainstorm with stuff. It's super useful. We've been doing this for, I don't know, probably 5-6 months now, and it's been a tremendous number of people showing up and getting a lot of stuff done. I know Mike and I are there pretty regularly. Jonathan's there off and on. Actually, I was thinking as I go through the attendee list here, a couple people in the attendee list have also shown up off and on. So definitely show up. You can be a wallflower if you like. You don't have to do anything. Just drop by, see what it's like, and hopefully it'll help you.
Yeah, nothing has been off the board there. I mean, I know that we've tried to tackle actually some pretty complex stuff, but lots of people have just had simple questions that have just been nagging them, and so we're able to put some brain trust together and try to get a solution to some people before they even hang up.
And we put that together because a lot of administrators are working on their own. And it's really nice to have some peers to be able to have a conversation with on a more frequent basis than the user groups. So.
Yeah, and then one last thing I'll just add is I hope everybody enjoyed the deep dive today. We do have quite a few more deep dives coming up. Specifics, KPI metrics, effective searching, just for a few of them that we kind of have queued up within the next month and 2 months. So just follow us on social media, and you can keep up if you want on the emailing list. You can also email us, and I can put you on there.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Really appreciate it. I hope you got something out of it, and good luck with your approvals. If you have any questions, just reach out to us. We'd be happy to answer your questions. And this will be available on our YouTube channel and other places if you want to go back and watch it again. Thank you and have an awesome day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.